Who am I? Like millions of women everywhere, I am a typist, I am a housewife, I am a mother, and I have been a factory worker. For 25 years, I have been involved in revolutionary politics, concentrating on a liberation of women in the US, where I grew up, and later in the West Indies and England. I am one of those people who have always listened to women assuming what they are not necessarily what they can be. Selma James. So on 3rd of July, I received an email from the Women's Global Strike campaign that I had written to in order to find out more about one of the founders of this campaign. The Women Global Strike has since its inception in 2015 brought together 198 organizations from over 60 countries and territories, and the strike on International Women's Day on March 8, 2020 was celebrated in as many countries. If women stop, the world stops. So, and now there was the answer from the 90 years old Selma James herself. What do we want to know? What have we read about her and by her? And what are we studying? She was asking as much as she was answering my question, who is the woman who will celebrate her 90th birthday and has been an activist for about 80 of them. Selma James is taking a time for us. So James was born Selma Ditch on 15 August 1930 in Brooklyn, New York, in a movemental household. Her father, a Jewish immigrant from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was a truck driver who never went to school. He was internationalist and anti-Zionist, an orator who fought to form a Teamster union local in Brooklyn, and that had to fight the mafia that took the union over. Her US born mother had been a factory worker from when she was 12 years old and was now a housewife. She was involved in the community she which they lived, like activists of today's Occupy movement. She defended evicted families fighting to move them from pavement back into their homes and to get home relief welfare. James had been a factory worker, so were her mother and sister, and her other sister was an office worker. Selma was trained in that movement as a 6-year-old. She collected tin foil for bullets for the defense of Spanish Republic from 1936 to 1938. At age of 15, she joined the Johnson's Forest Tendency, a small political organization led by Trinidad scholar, historian, and activist C.R.R. James, which had split later reunited and split again from the Socialist Workers' Party. So she got her secondary education, high school in Brooklyn, New York. Her first job was a waitress and babysitting. At the age of 17, she entered in a factory in California. She worked on the assembly line for radios, television, and appliances. She had signed up to study at the university, but later then she decided not to go. She thought college was going to harm her mind. She married a fellow factory worker at age of 18, the only way to escape her family. That was, she said, at that time. And within a year, eventually they separated after 4 years. Her son, Sam Winston, is a radical trade unionist in America.
Selma began to talk to the leader of her group, C.L.R. James. She told him about the struggle of being a housewife, a word she applied to every woman in America, whether she worked outside the home or not. He encouraged her to write about it, since she had never heard anything political about housewife before. She was lacking confidence, so he told her to write down each idea as it came to her on a slip of paper and collect them in a shoebox. After a while, you open the box, put all these sentences in order, and you have a draft. Selma says, I took a day off work from the factory where I was wiring and soldering. I left as I was going to work. I put my son in childcare and at the same time as usual. But I went to a friend's house instead because if I could have stayed home, I would have cleaned the cooker. I know I would have. I put the sentences together, and by the evening I had the draft of a pamphlet. He had been absolutely right, and that's how A Woman's Place came into light. James wrote A Woman's Place in 1952, a full decade before Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystic diagnosed the problem that has no name, the boredom of suburban housewives. Selma James identified the same problem in working-class New Yorkers. Friedan's book was so heavily attacked for focusing on the problem of white middle-class women, while James' work on immigrants and working-class women was merely ignored. In 1953, C.L.R. James was deported to the UK, supposedly for lack of a visa, more likely under McCarthy's anti-communist hunt. Selma followed him. In England, she went to work in a factory similar to the one in which she had worked in the States. She wanted to know what British society was about and to find her connections. She was an immigrant. She had to work hard to find her feet. In 1956, she married C.R. James and they lived together for 30 years. In 1958, C.L.R. James goes to Trinidad to support the independence movement. Until 1962, Selma James worked with him in the movement for Caribbean Federation and independence. She worked on The Nation, a bi-weekly newspaper of the ruling Nationalist Party. She later said that her time there was a source of learning from which she has continued to draw. I fell in love with the West Indies. Everything seemed possible. I had to learn that it was a microcosm of global politics, and that what we confronted there was the same enormity that we confront everywhere. The United States was in charge as they have been in much of the world. She realized that the independence movement was really not as important to the people as the federation movement. The 10 islands wanted to be one nation. That was that that's what the grassroots was interested in. But the politicians were interested in power for themselves, and the federation didn't succeed. She called it one of the tragedies of her life. After living in Trinidad, she knew one thing for sure. She had enough of the middle class, of the intelligentsia, and was going to be with working class people from now on. In 1962, she returned home to Great Britain and became the first organizing secretary of the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination in 1965, as well as founder of and editor of the Black Regional Action Movement newspaper in 1969. She paid the rent by working as a freelance audio typist for the BBC.
90 and still campaigning for neglected in the society. Her intellectual tradition uncovered and named the power relationship within our society. It gave feminism a class analysis. This is vital because the opposite of feminist is not man. The women's movement doesn't hate men, it hates patriarchy, a system created and supported by all of us, where men and women are legally, financially, and socially unequal. In a 1971 BBC film, Selma said, we want to make it clear we are not concerned about the few women who make it in this society. We are not concerned that there be more members to parliament who are women. That would be very nice, very useful. But that is now up not our concern. We are concerned with redefining politics, and what we mean by politics is people taking hold of their own environment and changing it to suit themselves and not being at the mercy of events. In 1972, Selma started to organize the Wages for Housewife campaign on the back of a contested policy proposal to cancel the family allowance, which at this point provided all British women, including the Queen, with a weekly check based on the number of children they provide for. The International Wages for Housework campaign, organized simultaneously in France, Italy, England, US, argues that running the home should be recognized as work in official statistics and that people doing this labor should be paid a wage by the government. She coined the word unwaged, which has since entered the English language. Unwaged refers to unpaid work. In the book, Power of Woman and the Subversion of the Community, she expands the ideas put forward in the program and argues that the entire labor market is built upon the unpaid work of women. In Britain, wages for housework groups were single minded in their promotion of this idea. We are always the indispensable workforce, wrote Selma James in 1975. At home, cleaning, washing, and ironing, making, disciplining, and bringing up babies, servicing men physically, sexually, and emotionally. The bluntness of their language gave us the idea about the group's uncompromising character. In May 1976, in The Guardian, Jill Tweedy wrote about gems that open any door, marked liberation, and behind it is a woman with a wages for housework badge on her bosom, 10,000 leaflets in her hand, a fanatical gleam in her eye, and her foot wedged firmly in the jab. In 1975, she becomes spokesperson of English collective prostitutes following a mobilization of sex workers in France, forms and wants to join the Wages for Housework campaign, and they needed Selma to speak for them, not to be in the public. Selma James read Capital when she was 40 in a study group in England. She said in an interview that the experience was transformative. She is saying, by the time I had studied for 6 or 8 months, I understood that the crucial question was woman. There it was in the book. Marx's theory of value is based on the concept of labor power, and obviously, what women do is produce this basic capitalist commodity. I thought everyone knew that, and they had neglected to tell me. Confronted with the new women's movement in England, she understood that most of the people in her study group, for example, had not grappled with housework. They all thought women would go out to work as a form of liberation. They didn't know the life of working class women. When she was packing marshmallows for a supermarket, one of the worst paid jobs, there were plenty of black women around her. As she moved to wiring and soldering television set, a little further up the hierarchy, she noticed that her co-workers were now white women. She had discovered the sacred sorting mechanism of class, race, and sex in the workplace. It took her until 1983 before she wrote on this realization in Marx and Feminism and developed further the idea of the hierarchy of labor.
Over the years, Selma James has continued to champion the cause of women, and she expanded the understanding of unwaged work. They found allies in the movement against war and occupation with the slogan Invest in Caring, Not Killing. In 2008, James is a founding member in the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. In her speech of the 2010 U.S. Assembly of Jews, she reclaims the Jewish legacy of the commitment to movements for social justice. Selma James thinks anti-Zionism is an aspect of anti-racism, and it is crucial for Jewish people who have a history of struggle to take a stand. They've always massively taken part in organizations for change. From the grassroots, they have been fighting for liberation and for justice. And what Israel has done in their name is absolutely horrendous. not only the occupation of Palestine, but also the fact that Zionists have found themselves supporting every dictator, every counter-revolution, from Pinochet in Chile to the dictatorships in the Middle East. It even brought the boycott against apartheid. On behalf of whom? Not on behalf of the Jewish people. It seemed only right that they speak up as Jewish people and refuse to be identified with what Israel is doing to Palestine. Bombing civilians in Gaza, she means that for the Jewish people who have been through the genocide that Hitler perpetrated against them, Israel's actions are a dishonor for all those of them who fought in the uprising of Warsaw Ghetto, and for everyone who died and at the hands of a dictator. Supporting a dictator is really a dishonor to their whole history and means denying it. And in Brooklyn, where she is from, she knows Jewish people have always been fighting for justice. Women are not always about pretty things. It's about who we are, what happened to us, and how our lives are affected. Welcome to the woman's world. The world is full of conflict. Do's, don'ts, have, haven't, and what not. For centuries, women's unweighted labor have been glorified with sacrifice, kindness, a great contribution to society. One don't have to read some books to understand the dialectics, the binary of women's world, and Selma is still going strong. Today, she lives with her fellow campaigner and partner of 19 years, Nina Lopez, in London and organizes the next big women's and careers strike for the International Women's Day on March 8, 2021.